I'm Imran Garda, filling in for Derek Ashong, and you're in The Stream, a social media community with its very own TV show, and this is it. We're bringing you the stories that are ongoing, global, and sourced from social media. Today, pipeline politics. Is the US military hiding its true intentions in Afghanistan? And will it ever completely pull out of that country? Now, stepping into the role of digital producer today is Malika Bilal, who's come all the way from Doha. Malika, welcome. She'll be with us in place of Ahmed Shihabuddin just for this week, who's a lucky boy. He's away on vacation. Exactly. We'll speak to you in just a couple of moments, but welcome to the show, Malika.
Thank you. Good to be here. Next
to Malika, also on the famous or infamous couch, is award-winning filmmaker Julia Basha. Julia is with the organization Just Vision, and she's the media director. Julia, welcome to the show. It's your debut on the show, as it is with Malika. Tell us a little bit about Just Vision and what you do there.
It's great to be here. Just Vision was created about 8 years ago to fill in the gap left by the mainstream media in the coverage of Israelis and Palestinians working non-violently to end the conflict. So we've been working to disseminate their stories, both in international community and among Israelis and Palestinians who do not know the efforts that are going on locally using nonviolence.
How big is that gap? Because you have this binary view, you have this powerful state, the fourth largest military industrial complex in the world, and then of course you have the other view characterized by rockets and Hamas and Qassams. In between, there's this massive gap, as you mentioned. How big is the gap given your experience?
Well, I think that what I have seen is an overwhelming bias, both in the Western media and in the Arab media, in the coverage of this conflict. And that bias is the same, which is a bias towards violence. So what gets covered is this dynamic that you're describing in terms of a very big military, and sometimes you will see coverage of the military in interventions in the West Bank and Gaza, or you will see coverage of suicide attacks at the height of the Second Intifada when that was ongoing. And what you have not been seeing for all of these 6 decades of media coverage of this conflict are hundreds and thousands of Israelis and Palestinians who have been trying to use nonviolent efforts, especially in the last 8 years, that has been kind of brought upon by villages that are mostly on the seam in the West Bank that are using it to try to save their lands and their water resources from encroachment by Israeli settlers.
Well, it's
soldiers.
wonderful to have you here, because this is what we're all about. It's about those untold stories and looking at those who fall between the media cracks, if you like. Malika, welcome. I know Malika quite well. She's a web producer for us. She's sub-edited some of my horrible web pieces and those infamous blogs, but Malika has also been on the Hajj coverage with me as well. For those who don't know much about you, you're from Chicago, working in Doha. What else do we need to know about you, Malika?
I'm excited to be in DC at the museum and on this couch. So very good to be here.
It's a pilgrimage in itself.
It is, a little bit, yeah, mini one.
Malika, give us some insight into the feedback that we've been receiving over the weekend.
Our hands are on the pulse, and one of the biggest things that we are kind of following right now, it's blowing up our Twitter feeds, is the hashtag Feed Somalia. And this has basically been brought to our attention by a Twitter user, Ahmed Diri, who created this website, feedsomalia.com. Now, this is just to raise awareness about the devastating drought in the Horn of Africa. I think UNICEF says that about 11 million people are suffering humanitarian crisis from this drought. So this website is just an aggregation of tweets, Facebook posts, basically to raise awareness, but also a place that people can go to figure out how they can donate, how they can help. Another kind of innovative idea that was brought to our attention was by the Twitter user Dadab Response, who says, young filmmakers are bringing survival backpacks to drought victims. Please support. Now, these survival backpacks are basically little packs that these filmmakers are filling, giving to refugees in the world's largest refugee camp, which is located in Kenya and is made up of a lot of Somali refugees. They are documenting their efforts and then placing them online. Here's just a little clip of some of what they're doing.
aniga waxaan imiday shalayto waxaan ka imid xamar awlaadaydu waxna way jiraan waxna way iiga dhinteen marka saasaan ku nimid inta
You can, of course, check out more of that on our website. But then across the world, in Turkey now, another hashtag we're following is Twitter Kurds. There's not a whole lot of video or pictures yet about this issue, but it has definitely been brought to our attention by several Twitter users who want to make sure that we're covering it and know that something is happening. Now, this recently started getting hot after a clash a couple of days ago between Turkish soldiers and Kurdish fighters in Turkey. And one Twitter user posted this tweet, which says, basically, a man who takes away another man's freedom is a prisoner of hatred. Now, this is interesting because it's a quote from Nelson Mandela. It is his birthday, and we'll be talking about that more on the post show. So those are the stories that we're following. But of course, we want to know what stories you are following. So tweet them to us at the hashtag AJStream.
Hi, I'm Dargham Haytham from Iraq. I'm studying medicine at Baghdad University. I'm here participating in the Iraqi Young Leaders Exchange Program, and I'm in the stream.
Now let's talk Afghanistan. What is the true purpose of the US military's presence in Afghanistan? Is it simply to create institutions of democracy, or to help build and protect a gas pipeline from energy-rich Central Asia right to the Arabian Sea? Well, as the US withdraws its first set of troops from Afghanistan as part of President Barack Obama's planned withdrawal, many are asking, is Washington actually plotting to stay on in Afghanistan and perhaps for the long haul? Well, that was the question asked by journalist Pepe Escobar in his article for Al Jazeera's website. It's called Why the US Won't Leave Afghanistan. It's a controversial piece. It's a very divisive piece, and I suppose that's why we're talking about it. It became the top trending story on the website Reddit, and Reddit, of course, aggregates news stories and lets readers comment on them. This is what the byline said: surge, bribe and run, or surge, bribe and stay. How US military bases and the energy war play out in Afghanistan. As you can see, it was tweeted by 356, liked by more than 3,000. Let me show you what the article deals with. It's about a proposed pipeline. This is it. Let me try and blow it up. Of course, no pun intended. Let me try and make that a little bit bigger for you. There you go. It goes from Turkmenistan to Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. And it's called TAPI because it's an abbreviation of all those countries involved. It would be interesting if it actually happens, because it would take a little bit of cooperation between Pakistan and India. So that's what the proposed pipeline is, and these are what some of the comments are that have been coming through. Here's one. It says, this person obviously agrees somewhat with Pepe Escobar. It's about money. It's easier to make in an impoverished society. There are no winners unless there are losers. Let's go out of that from our Storyfy to somewhere towards the bottom. And here you go. Here's somebody who's not too keen on the theory, perhaps seeing it as a conspiracy theory. I'm all ears when it comes to intelligent arguments that we shouldn't be in Afghanistan, etc. But the notion that our entire involvement is some sort of get-rich scheme is absurd. Let's try to find out if it's absurd or not. Joining us now via Skype is Pepe Escobar himself, who says energy and not democracy is the true agenda of the US military strategy in Afghanistan. And also with us, as you can see on the screen, is Derek Crow, political director at Brave New Foundation. It's an American forum that encourages open debate about critical issues concerning the US. Currently, Derek is working on a campaign titled Rethink Afghanistan. Welcome to the stream, both of you. Mr. Escobar, if I could start with you. As you heard from that quote that I just read out to you, somebody thinks it's absurd. Perhaps a lot of people would think the theory is absurd when they see it through the lens of the current geopolitical reality. How would you respond to that claim?
No, it's not a question of being absurd. It's a question of what's really happening on the ground. And this story has been buried by American mainstream media and most of Western mainstream media for not only 10 years, over 15 years. This story started in the mid-1990s during the Clinton administration. I've been following this story since the late 90s, when I asked the Taliban themselves how much money did they want for a pipeline to be built. And you know what they told me? What we need, which at the time used to be something around $50 million in terms of transit rights. At the time, during the Clinton administration, it was more or less settled that the pipeline would be built by UNOCAL. In fact, the Taliban were discussing with Bridas, an Argentinian company. Then UNOCAL stepped in. It's a very messy story, but basically, UNOCAL was supposed to land this contract. But then came 9/11. And until a few weeks before 9/11, I was in Pakistan, Afghanistan at the time, there were still discussions between now the Bush administration, not the Clinton administration anymore, and the Taliban about building the pipeline. And then after 9/11, there was that famous remark by Richard Armitage, when he told the Pakistanis and also the Taliban indirectly that instead of a carpet of gold, meaning, okay, let's build a pipeline, they'll be buried under a carpet of bombs if they didn't ally with America or if they didn't hand over Osama bin Laden. So this is an extremely complex, messy story on the ground that involves...
It's a complex, messy story, Mr. Escobar. However, you have highlighted one part of it, which perhaps Derek Crow would say is exaggerated. I want to bring him in. Let's try and get as much response as possible. Derek Crow, essentially, from what I understand, from what Pepe Escobar had to say there, was that instead of bribing the Taliban to the tune of, say, $5 million, the United States went and spent $5 trillion in the war on terror. It was a bad mistake.
It's absolutely true that it was a bad mistake. I mean, if you look at what that commenter said, that they can't believe this is a get-rich-quick scheme, I mean, one almost in a perverse sense would hope that it was a get-rich-quick scheme, because at least then there'd be some sort of rationality behind it. But as it stands, we've got an enormously counterproductive policy that's being pursued for any number of reasons, but none of them are looking at actual results.
Derek, you see it as a counterproductive policy. However, do you agree that the pipeline features heavily in U.S. plans, maybe perhaps not so much in taking the U.S. into Afghanistan, but rather prolonging the stay in Afghanistan? Do you believe that the pipeline plays a role there?
Well, I'm sure it does in some factions of the U.S. government. I mean, there are a lot of different people pushing this bad policy for a lot of different reasons. But one of the things I told your producers was that if the United States is looking through a long-term military policy like the one that's in place now to lay the groundwork for a pipeline, and you need stability in Afghanistan in order to do that, that's a completely irrational thing for the United States to be doing, because the results on the ground have shown that the policy is absolutely not leading to stability. It's actually leading to much more instability.
Pepe Escobar, why do you think your article went viral, as they say?
It's very interesting because I've been writing about this on Asia Times extensively and in depth for years, always. I always have very good response. I'm very pleased that now writing, in fact, this is an extremely diluted version of an extremely complex story. I'm very pleased that I'm getting all sorts of comments from the conspiracy theory bracket to people who actually believe in it, because it's based on facts on the ground. I'm not peddling any agenda here. I'm an independent analyst and observer. I happen to have been to Afghanistan and Pakistan many times, very good sources, and this story has been going on in my head for over 10 years.
Well, if I could jump in here just for a second, I guess this is a question for both of you, and it's based on a tweet we have from Iron Chariots, who says, if it's a get-rich-quick scheme, it sure isn't working too well. So I guess this kind of begs the question, wouldn't it have been cheaper for the U.S. to just have gone ahead and done the pipeline beforehand and not be in as much debt as it is now?
Well, I mean, one thing to think about that would be that $5 trillion that we were just mentioning, that went somewhere. That went into people's pockets somewhere. Money just doesn't disappear. Somebody's making it on a scheme like that, right? So there are people in the United States making an enormous amount of money off this war, namely defense contractors, people who contract with the U.S. military and provide services to them there. So any war is that way, in which people do make a lot of money. It's just that money doesn't go into the American people's pockets generally. It goes into the hands of a very few.
Okay, let's get Pepe Escobar to answer that question, and then Julia will come in.
Look, Derek is absolutely right. Can you imagine if this was being applied to overhauling the infrastructure of the West, which is crumbling absolutely everywhere, and it has been, directed towards health and education? The thing is, this is a concourse of circumstances and profits to be made by defense contractors, industrial military complex, parts of big oil, in this case American, but also Europeans. And the fact, very important, that is always overlooked, the thing is to bypass Iran and Russia as sources of energy. So this pipeline should come from Turkmenistan, cross Afghanistan, but benefit basically Pakistan.
But Mr. Escobar,
India.
you spoke about the fact that many conspiracy theorists are latching on to your article, perhaps supporting you, perhaps disseminating this, and maybe cherry picking the parts that apply to them. When you say that this is about keeping, Iran in check and diminishing Russian influence, that may be a byproduct of being in Afghanistan, which the US is no doubt happy about, but that doesn't necessarily give them reason to go into Afghanistan, does it? That may not necessarily have been the reason for them to go into Afghanistan. Do you perhaps concede that?
No, it's not a question of conceding. Look, go to the facts. If you analyze the Pentagon's full spectrum dominance doctrine, which have been polished for the past few years. In fact, it was more or less ordinated in 2002. It was repolished in 2004. This is the Pentagon's Bible. It implies in that theater of war that now is called AFPAC, but in fact is Eurasia, Eastern Eurasia, that the number one priority is to prevent the emergence of competitors. The key competitors are Russia and China. And in terms of energy, the key competitors are Russia and Iran. So, as a counterpunch to the full spectrum dominance doctrine, what is happening in that theater at the moment? Russia and China are getting closer. China and Pakistan are getting closer. China wants a solution for Afghanistan that does not involve an eternal NATO war, which is depleting the US coffers and NATO's coffers as well. So, of course, in terms of unintended consequences, what Zbigniew Brzezinski wanted at the time in the 1990s, let's go back to Afghanistan. Let's install ourselves over there, and let's have a second war, and now we're going to have it profitable in terms of benefiting economically from it. That's where the pipeline comes in. But the unintended consequence was, later there was the 9/11 development, later the US full spectrum dominance doctrine, now we're going to stay here for good. Now we have our military bases near Russia and China, who cannot abandon them. So you see, the whole thing one thing overlaps into another.
Indeed, it does overlap. And talking about overlapping, I want to bring Julia in here. Julia?
Well, I'm hearing all of this. I think there are two big questions. One is, why did we go in? And the other one is, why are we still there 10 years later? And I do think it's important to separate a bit the two. I was just at a conference about a week ago, and Rory Stewart, who many people call British consciousness, who was a foreign service officer with the British, and who is now a British Member of Parliament, was speaking, and he was very much saying that the reason why we're still there 10 years later is that the military has been unable to accept the notion of failure, and that the notion that you cannot fail inevitably leads to failure.
Let me take that and throw that towards Derek. Derek, would you agree that in a decade, the entire NATO-ISAF alliance, spearheaded by the United States, has not been able to clearly articulate the actual reasons for staying in Afghanistan? Many people might understand the reason for going in, given the circumstances surrounding 9/11 and the aftermath, but the reasons for staying have been murky at best.
I think that's absolutely true, but I don't want to say that in saying that the opportunities seen by folks who want this pipeline put in are playing into that mix. But what I will say is that we've never had a clear idea from the side of the Americans as to what victory looks like in Afghanistan with this counterinsurgency strategy. We've never been clear with the Afghans what our expectations are of them for their side of the counterinsurgency strategy. And we've had a political class here in Washington that has been unwilling to be the person who stands up and says, 10 years on is enough, we've failed in these objectives, and it's not worth the continued investment, because they're afraid of being called soft on defense. And that's a box that both parties have been painting themselves into for years in the United States.
Malika, dip into the tweets for us and give us some feedback from the community.
Well, one of the things that I think a lot of people on Twitter are kind of asking about is what does this mean for contractors? One tweet here from Jay Blalock says, much of our military services are provided by groups like XE, the group formerly known as Blackwater. Maybe folks want to pipe someday, but they're getting rich right now. What can you tell us about what this means for contractors, our military contractors?
Who's that for, Derek?
Anyone that can answer it.
Well, I mean, what it means for contractors in Afghanistan right now is they're making money hand over fist. I mean, they're the only clear beneficiaries of a policy of staying in Afghanistan right now are the people who are being paid to be there. And that's, by the way, they're making a lot more than the average U.S. soldier is making over there. You've got folks like Lockheed Martin and General Atomics and folks like that who make the drones that are flying over Afghanistan. But even down to just the food service there is contracted out. And we even pay people to protect our convoys of soldiers, as if soldiers aren't capable of protecting
the soldiers of the soldiers.
Yes, it's outrageous, the layers of redundancy that we build there to give somebody a profit. So, I mean, you're right that a pipeline is going to make somebody a lot of money someday, and it would, provide certain strategic benefits in the minds of the people who are pursuing them. But there are people right now making billions off of keeping our soldiers there.
Okay, I want to throw something to Pepe Escobar from his very own article, because I found it interesting. It was a creative piece of writing, but I'm not too sure if I understand it fully. I've got it on the screen. Let's see if we can have a look at it. From the standpoint of these elites, you write, Mr. Escobar, the ideal endgame scenario is global Robocop NATO. What on earth does that mean, Mr. Escobar?
Well, you should read my pieces on Asia Times. It's all there. It's been there for years, actually. That's the thing. When you cover NATO, as I did in Brussels in the 90s, when you cover Afghanistan, Pakistan, when you cover Washington, when you cover China, after a while, I had one possibility. I could go to Bali and start selling ice cream or do surfing on the beach. And the other possibility, okay, let's take this all seriously. Let's see what this melting pot is all about. Look, the most important thing in AFPAC is who's profiting. Who's profiting is the industrial military complex. As Derek said as well, the contractors, some earn $200,000 a year, especially the soldiery bit. And certain people inside the Bush and then the Obama administration who still pursue what is a big Brzezinski idea. Let's try to isolate Russia. Let's try to isolate China. If we build a pipeline, we're going to have Turkmen gas going to Western markets and not profiting Russia or Iran. But at the same time, they forgot to take a look at how do you fight a war against the Pashtuns. Everybody in history who fought a war against the Pashtuns lost. And that's exactly what's happening. Now the United States in Afghanistan, they are fighting a war against the national Pashtun majority resistance movement. And in the tribal areas in Afghanistan, because simply they cannot go there, because no American can go in the tribal areas, even disguised as a Pashtun.
That's a fair point about the Pashtuns. And that's a dynamic that many people don't seem to bring into the equation. We're going to let you flesh out your argument, and Derek as well, in the post-show. We'll have 10 minutes more chat, if you like, in the post-show. Just very finally, Julia, some thoughts to wrap up here in about 20, 30 seconds?
Well, I think we didn't talk at all about what actually the local people might be thinking. And I do believe that's one of the key elements missing in any foreign policies, that we don't have people who speak the languages to really communicate. If you see our foreign service, either the American foreign service or the British or the people serving on the ground, there isn't proper communication going on. And I think, it leads to this kind of ongoing debate, who's profiting, who's what, and we kind of even forget what the people want.
That's a fantastic point. Julia, Malika, Pepe Escobar, and Derek, thank you all. Thanks for watching the stream. We'll see you tomorrow. You can continue this conversation online.